Florida, the land of Disney, beaches, alligators, and humidity thick enough to chew. But beyond the sunshine and theme parks lurks a much darker truth. Florida is also one of the strangest missing persons hotspots in America. From eerie disappearances deep in the swamps to vanishings that hint at aliens, interdimensional portals, and even ancient swamp spirits, these are 5 chilling, unsolved missing persons mysteries that prove the Sunshine State is hiding something sinister. Because in Florida, it's not just the gators you should fear, it's the things you can't explain. As we all know, a lot of weird shit goes down in the Sunshine State. The vanishing of Carla DeWitt, Ocala National Forest, 1998. Carla DeWitt wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to vanish without a trace. She was 32, healthy, and had that kind of life people put on Instagram to make their friends jealous. Road trips, yoga poses in awkward places, captions like "wander often, wonder always." She lived for that kind of thing. If she wasn't in the woods, she was planning to be. In October of 1998, Carla drove her Subaru into Florida's Ocala National Forest, a place that's beautiful, yes, but also notorious. Missing 401 researchers call it a cluster zone, which is just a fancy way of saying people disappear here a lot, and usually in ways that don't make sense. She parked her car at the Juniper Springs trailhead. Inside, she left her wallet, her phone, and a nearly empty Starbucks latte with her name spelled wrong on it. She grabbed her backpack, a journal, a couple snacks, and of course her yoga mat, because what's a hike without a sun salutation in the middle of nowhere? And then she walked into the forest, and she never came back out. Days later, rangers found her Subaru exactly where she left it. Still locked, still tidy, still with that now congealed latte in the cup holder. Search teams brought in dogs, helicopters, volunteers, everything short of calling in Scooby-Doo. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a sock, not even an abandoned granola wrapper. Carla had seemingly evaporated into the salty, humid air. But here's where the story takes a hard left into conspiracy land. The searchers did find one thing: Carla's journal. And this is what makes her case feel like it came straight from a horror movie. The journal wasn't buried deep in the woods. It wasn't ripped up or waterlogged. It was just sitting neatly on a stump less than a mile from her car, like she had set it there for someone to find. The last entry said this: "The forest is so quiet tonight, too quiet. No crickets, no wind, just silence. I feel like I'm being watched, but when I turn around, it's only the trees. The stars look wrong, like they're moving. I think I should head back tomorrow, but part of me feels like they're waiting for me. They're waiting for me." That's the last thing Carla ever wrote. Now here's where us conspiracy nuts come in with our theories. Some say this is a classic missing 411 case. Carla was a healthy, experienced hiker who disappeared in broad daylight. Search dogs couldn't track her scent. Helicopter searches came up empty. This case definitely checks all the boxes. Others, however, point to the UFO sightings. In the days after Carla vanished, multiple people near Silver Springs reported seeing strange lights hovering low over the trees. Silent, glowing orbs that moved in ways that planes and helicopters simply do not. A few witnesses even swore they saw beams of light shining down into the forest. Of course, there are the skeptics who say maybe she stumbled into something she shouldn't have, like a Florida Man meth lab in the middle of the forest. But come on, if Florida Man got her, there'd surely be some evidence: a scrap of clothing, a suspicious tooth, maybe a gator burp. But there's nothing other than her journal and car. Though Carla's family eventually held a memorial, many people online are convinced she didn't die. They insist she was taken. Some say she's on a mothership right now, sipping alien kombucha. What makes this even more creepy is that every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, campers in Ocala claim to see strange lights hovering in the sky near Juniper Springs. Some even say they've heard a woman's voice whispering their name when they're alone in the woods. The case of the fishing twins, Everglades, 2006. If you grew up in Florida, you know a fishing guy. The type of guy who's more comfortable on a boat than on land, who owns more tackle boxes than shoes, and whose idea of a gourmet dinner is fried bass and bush light. Now imagine that guy, but doubled. That was Derek and Donald Kramer. Identical twins, 30 years old, from Palatka, Florida. They were inseparable, and they lived for one thing: fishing. Freshwater, saltwater, river, swamp, mud puddle, you name it, they'd throw a line into it. In July of 2006, the brothers took their small aluminum boat out on the St. Johns River, just south of Lake George. According to friends, they were obsessed with their secret fishing hole, a spot they swore no one else knew about. Derek bragged that the fish there practically jumped into your lap. Some people think that's what got the twins into trouble. The Kramers pushed off around 5:30 in the evening. Neighbors saw them loading their cooler with beer and bait before they motored into the river. That was the last anyone ever saw of them. When they didn't come home, search crews scoured the river. They found the brothers' boat 2 days later, drifting in circles like it had been abandoned. The motor was still running, sputtering on its last fumes. Inside the boat, 2 fishing rods, 1 half-crushed can of Bud Light, and, this is the creepy part, the cooler was still full. Their bait and beer were completely untouched. Now, anyone who knew the Kramer twins would tell you straight up, those boys never left beer behind. If you told me they'd abandoned their wives, sure. Their car? Probably. But a full cooler? No chance. That was the first red flag. The official story was accidental drowning. Authorities said they probably fell out, got pulled under, and the river swallowed them up. But here's the thing. Divers searched the area for weeks. They never found bodies. Not even a shoe. Not even a floating trucker hat. So the conspiracies began. Some locals swore they saw strange orb-like lights hovering above Lake George the night the twins vanished. The lights reportedly moved in weird, jerky patterns before shooting off into the sky and disappearing from view. The prevailing theory is that the Kramers weren't fishing for bass, but that they got fished themselves. Reeled up, hook, line, and sinker, by something not from around here. And maybe that secret fishing hole wasn't theirs at all. Perhaps something watching from above had already claimed it. David Paulides fans latched onto the case. It had all the classic signs: experienced outdoorsmen vanishing without a trace, personal belongings left behind in pristine condition, water nearby, and dogs unable to track anything. They insist the brothers didn't drown. Instead, they likely slipped into one of those geographic portals that pop up in hotspot areas. And because this is Florida, there are always whispers that maybe the Kramers stumbled into something they weren't supposed to see. A backwoods drug operation, a swamp cult, some illegal gator wrestling ring. The problem with these theories are, again, there's no evidence. No blood, no damage to the boat, nothing. If Florida Man had gotten them, surely there'd be at least one tooth in the mud. Here's the part that makes the hair on your neck stand up. A week after the boat was found, a fisherman swore he heard voices out on the water just before dawn. He said it sounded like 2 men laughing, talking about the big one that got away. He looked around, but there were no boats in sight. Just fog and still water. The fisherman was so shaken he went back to shore and refused to fish that stretch of the river again. To this day, some locals claim if you're out on the St. Johns around sunrise, you can still hear 2 men talking and laughing, like they're out there fishing, just beyond the mist. The Orlando Lights, 2012. Brian Monroe wasn't what you'd call an avid outdoorsman. He was 39, worked IT from his Orlando apartment, and thought hiking meant walking to his mailbox without tripping over his sandals. But like a lot of people in midlife, Brian hit that point where he decided he needed to reconnect with nature and maybe get into a little better shape too. The problem was, Brian had no idea what he was doing. His idea of gear was cargo shorts, a Walmart tent, and a Costco-sized bag of beef jerky. Still, in the summer of 2012, he packed it all into his beat-up Honda and drove north into the Ocala National Forest. He told coworkers he wanted to unplug for a weekend. Which is ironic, considering this guy had a panic attack if the Wi-Fi went down for 5 minutes. Brian parked his Honda near a primitive campsite along a remote stretch of trail. He checked in with the ranger station, signed the logbook like a good Floridian, and set out with his tent and jerky. He was supposed to be back at work Monday morning. He never showed. By Tuesday, his coworkers reported him missing. Rangers went looking and found his Honda exactly where he left it. Inside the car were his phone, his laptop, and a half-empty energy drink swimming with ants. The weird part? His campsite was only half finished. His tent was lying flat on the ground, stakes scattered like he'd just dropped everything mid-setup. His pack was there too, neatly zipped, jerky still untouched. It was as if Brian had stood up in the middle of pitching camp, walked off into the trees, and never came back. Now, here's where things get spicy. Two separate campers swore they saw lights in the forest the same weekend Brian vanished. Bright, white orbs that hovered low in the trees, silent but pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. One guy said he thought they were drones, until one blinked out and reappeared instantly on the other side of the clearing. Some theorize that perhaps Brian wandered a little too close to those lights. At the end of the day, if aliens are doing field research on planet Earth, Florida would certainly offer plenty of interesting specimens. There's always the possibility he stumbled into something uniquely Floridian. A backwoods meth shack, a swamp cult in the middle of a midnight ritual, or maybe just an extremely territorial gator. But again, there's no blood, no shredded clothing, no nothing, just his abandoned campsite. Even Florida man usually leaves some kind of mess behind. The search teams combed the area for days. Nothing. But on the third day, one of the volunteers swore he heard something. A voice. It was faint, carried on the wind, but clear enough to understand. A man's voice calling for help. "Over here! Over here!" The rescuers charged in the direction of the voice, crashing through palmetto and pine. But when they reached the clearing, it was empty. Just still forest and dead silence. That wasn't the only time either. Other volunteers said they heard the same thing. Brian's voice, yelling for help, always just out of reach. Some said it sounded closer at night, echoing from the tree line, like he was still wandering out there, forever lost. Brian Monroe was never found. No body, no bones, not even a Costco jerky wrapper. His case sits in that limbo zone, filed away as missing, but never solved. The Key Largo diver who didn't surface, 2017. David Halpern was the type of guy people called steady. 34 years old, worked as a mechanical engineer in Jacksonville. He was a husband and father of two. David wasn't the kind of man who took risks. If anything, his biggest gamble in life was ordering sushi from a gas station once, and he still told that story like it was his personal war memoir. But David had a hobby, hiking. He liked the peace and quiet of the trails, the solitude away from his spreadsheets and his chatty coworkers. His wife used to joke that he didn't go out there for exercise. He went out there to hide from other humans, and maybe she wasn't wrong. In November of 2017, David drove out to the Withlacoochee State Forest, one of Florida's lesser-known but massive stretches of wilderness. He parked at a trailhead near Silver Lake, signed in at the logbook, shouldered his pack, and set out on what should have been a half-day hike. And just like that, David Halpern seemingly walked out of this world. When he didn't come home that evening, his wife reported him missing. Search and rescue teams went in fast. They had his route, thanks to the trail log. They had daylight, dogs, helicopters. They expected to find him rather quickly. But the forest kept its secrets. No footprints, no gear, no torn clothing, just silence. It was as if the earth itself had opened up and swallowed David whole. It gets stranger. The dogs brought to track David's scent would start out strong, then suddenly stop, circle in confusion, and whimper like they'd hit a wall. That's a classic missing 411 red flag right there, when even the bloodhounds act like the trail just ends. Now, here's the part that cements this case in conspiracy territory. Multiple witnesses, both campers and hunters, reported seeing strange lights in the sky the same night David vanished. They described them as glowing white orbs with a faint blue halo. One hunter swore he saw a beam of light cut through the canopy, as if something was searching the forest floor. The lights were silent. There were no rotor noises or engine sounds, as one would expect. The orbs just hung there in the night, pulsing quietly. After a few moments, one by one, they shot off into the darkness at impossible speed, disappearing completely from view. The timing was right around when David was last seen. There are those who speculate that this is a classic missing 411 case. A healthy, prepared hiker disappeared in broad daylight, leaving all of his belongings behind. He vanished near the water, leaving an incomplete scent for the dogs to track. It's basically a textbook Paulides special. Fans of the theory believe David stepped into one of those geographic anomalies, slipping into a dimension we can't access. The UFO crowd, however, was much more interested in the lights noticed by the hunters. Their theory goes that David wasn't unlucky so much as chosen. They theorize that he was beamed up in that silent column of light and hauled aboard some craft. What's happened to him since? Nobody knows. Maybe he's floating in zero gravity, hooked up to probes and instruments. Or maybe he's sipping interstellar cocktails with Carla DeWitt and the Kramer twins. Of course, there's always a darker take. Some say the lights weren't aliens at all, but US military experiments. Withlacoochee has a history of low-flying aircraft, strange exercises, and rumors of underground facilities. What if David stumbled into the wrong area at the wrong time? What if those beams of light weren't extraterrestrial, but man-made? If that's true, it makes his disappearance even scarier, because it means someone down here decided he didn't get to come back. David Halpern has never been found. Not a bone, not a boot, not a backpack strap. His family eventually held a memorial, but for those who've studied the case, it remains a haunting mystery. Some say David stepped into another dimension. Some say he was collected by something not of this earth. Others whisper he's a casualty of some government experiment buried deep in Florida's woods. But one thing's certain, the Withlacoochee didn't just take David Halpern, so much as it erased him. And if you believe the stories, sometimes, when the night is clear and the forest is still, you can still see faint lights hovering above the tree line, as if they're still searching, still watching, waiting for the next David Halpern. The Case of the Tampa Camper, 2011. Emily Ramos was a 25-year-old nursing student from Tampa. According to friends and family, she had a reputation for being level-headed, cautious, and the type of person who double-checks that the oven is off 5 times before leaving the house. She certainly wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to be swallowed up by one of Florida's strangest disappearances. But unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. In June of 2011, Emily and 2 friends took a weekend trip to the Apalachicola National Forest. It was supposed to be low-key, hiking during the day, camping at night, topped off with s'mores and ghost stories. Apalachicola has a beauty that's often overlooked: dense pine flatwoods, swampy lowlands, and rivers that twist like veins across the land. But it also has something else: a reputation. Missing 411 researchers have flagged the forest as a hotspot. People vanish there. Hikers, hunters, campers. They walk in, but sometimes they don't walk out. On the second night of their trip, Emily and her friends set up camp near a creek. The evening started off normal: mosquito bites, cheap beer, arguments about whether or not you can roast a Pop-Tart over a fire. Around midnight, her friends crawled into the tent, exhausted after a long day. But not Emily. She stayed up, sitting by the fire with her journal, writing by flashlight. She had this habit of staying awake longer than everyone else, definitely the night owl of the group. When her friends woke up in the morning, they noticed that Emily was gone. Her tent was zipped up, untouched. Her boots sat neatly beside it. Her jacket hung over a branch. Even her flashlight and journal were sitting on the log by the fire. It was as if she'd just stood up in the middle of the night and walked straight into the forest barefoot. Her friends panicked, of course. They searched the creekside. They screamed her name until their throats went raw. Finally, in defeat, they hiked back to the ranger station. What followed was one of the largest searches the forest had seen in years. Dozens of volunteers, dogs, helicopters, and drones thoroughly combed the area. But Emily Ramos had left no trace. The dogs were briefly able to pick up her scent near the creek, but found nothing, just like it had evaporated into the air. This case does check all the missing 411 boxes. Person vanishes near water. Belongings left behind neatly. No tracks, no clues. Dogs lose the scent abruptly. Fans of the theory say Emily didn't just walk off. She slipped through one of those mysterious portals Paulides always talks about. Maybe into another dimension, maybe into another time. However, there's another chilling theory. Multiple people, campers, fishermen, even a trucker on Highway 65, reported strange lights in the forest that night. Orbs, glowing white and orange, moving in patterns that observers insist did not match planes or helicopters. One fisherman swore he saw a column of light shooting down into the trees, bright enough to light up the creek. His words, "It was like God turned on a flashlight." There's always the possibility that her disappearance was tied to the government. Apalachicola has long had rumors about military activity, strange aircraft flying low, unmarked black helicopters, even whispers of underground bunkers from the Cold War. Some believe Emily stumbled into something she shouldn't have, some midnight test or classified project. Perhaps instead of letting her go, they made sure she never came back. The search for Emily lasted weeks. No body or clothing was ever found. The authorities found no signs of struggle. Nothing. Emily Ramos simply ceased to exist in the physical world. Her family held a memorial, but the theories live on. Some say she was taken by aliens and that her calm, methodical personality made her the perfect candidate for study. Others think she slipped sideways into a dimension that's closer than we want to believe. And then there are the campers. People who still swear that if you spend the night near that same creek, you'll hear a woman's voice calling softly in the dark. Sometimes it says your name, and sometimes it just whispers, "I'm not alone." So what do all these cases have in common? Neatly placed belongings, strange lights, eerie silences, and no logical explanation. Florida may be famous for gators, hurricanes, and questionable theme park mascots, but these vanishings suggest something else is stalking the swamps and forests. Aliens? Interdimensional portals? A government cover-up involving Disney's underground tunnels? Take your pick. But if you ever go camping in Florida, remember this. If your shoes untie themselves, if the woods go dead silent, or if you see lights hovering above the palmettos, don't stick around to investigate. Because in Florida, the only thing stranger than the people is what happens when the people go missing. If you like these stories at the fourth dimension, please subscribe and hit the notification button.